Welcome to this episode of Compliance Lab with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my good friend, Rose Mesina from Resolution Economics. And we are back in our four-part series involving reduction in force and separation of employment. You started our first episode talking about auditing your current practices, what your current technology is, where to start, and looking at your practices and policies and types of technology that you're using and whether you're using it well and all of those good things, how to make sure you have a healthy, useful HR practices and all of your systems are operating the way that you want them to in a useful manner. And today we are going to be talking about when it comes time to use that data that you're collecting. And now we've looked at it. Hopefully you've got a smooth running machine. You're using all the technology. You're keeping up with compliance and what you need to do. Well, you have to make a reduction in force. You've got to start taking a look at this data and saying, okay, who do we terminate? What do we do? We're facing some financial struggles in this department. As part of our strategic vision, we need to make some changes. And now you got all this data. What do you do with it, Rose?
It's great that you have all the data, but by the time you're thinking about these things, you still have enough time to dig in, do some preliminary data analysis. And if you have some heightened risk in some areas of your company, then give yourself time to dig deeper into the data. And hopefully that can inform your strategy, whether you're actually going to pivot to a different employment action. Maybe you'll continue on with a reduction in force or separation from employment. Or after having looked at the data, maybe you can convince yourself that maybe I just need to reduce some hours or reduce pay. I think give yourself enough time to be able to look at your data and then make all of these decisions and then form a well-informed strategy plan. But for the data analysis itself, and this is specifically in the context of reduction in force, you want to know a few key things. What is the decisional unit? So in your intro, Sarah, your example is maybe you have some financial struggles in a particular department. Within that department, first of all, how many people do you think is it going to take for you to get to a comfortable state again? Think about who are the people within that department that's going to make this decision for you. What management level are they in? Who are the people reporting to the same managers? And that's really important because as you're making these decisions, and particularly from a data analysis perspective, you want to identify the pool of eligible employees, the pool of people that you're looking at and selecting from. Because when you analyze your data, you want to be able to make proper comparisons between those people. You don't want an over-aggregated analysis, for example, where you're selecting one person and you're saying it's one person out of however many thousand in the company. But those however many thousand people in the company may not necessarily be comparable to this person. That comparison isn't useful or insightful. So you'd want to identify, again, the pool of eligible employees that you're thinking about. Maybe we can terminate from that pool. Who among those people are comparable to the people that you're thinking about selecting for termination? The other pieces of data points that I think are also really important are your clear definitions of who would we be selecting, what department, what line of business, are there performance measures or some measures of productivity or impact? Those can be really important when you're looking at justifying these decisions and looking at whether those data points are maybe correlated with things like age. That's really important in the context of potential legal risks because you can have objective data, but you would also want to be aware whether all of that information or all of these factors can be correlated or can be seen as still closely related to a protected characteristic.
Yeah. You make a really good point that there's two buckets of ways to use it, where there's the business side of it, where you can use it to really help you figure out what you want to do, how you want to start. If you're building down from a goal of needing to reduce certain costs or overhead or whatever the goal is, it can really be used from a practical sense from a business side, but then also from the legal side to really identify trends or risks or concerns. From a discrimination perspective, for instance, the courts won't get involved in what the business decision is. They're not in the business of saying, hey, you can't terminate these people because I don't think it's the right business decision. You said you want to save money, but maybe this doesn't save you money. They don't want to get into the realm of that. What they do care about is there some type of impact that is discriminatory? Are you making decisions in a way that there's a disparate impact between these employees? So a lot of the things you're describing, that's why you want to look at it, because ultimately, if you've got a good business reason to do something, Largely, that's okay. That sounds simple and straightforward. Well, this is my business decision and this is fine. But to your point, there's unconscious bias that happens and there are unintended consequences of certain actions. And it doesn't necessarily mean you can't take them, but you need to know the risk in taking them and also stop and think. That's where the part that make sure you give yourself enough time to look at the data, really make the decisions, and also set up a criteria up front so that you can run everything through that before you're layering in the people and layering in these other pieces. And you want to take that time and also so you can check what your thoughts are. You might be going down one path, or you might have multiple decision makers, and one person's really got this great idea that they want to reduce these 5 people's pay or terminate these 5 people, but the data might actually help you challenge that assumption or that thought, or it might expose the risks. We see this a lot with age discrimination with risks, where your highest paid employees might all be over the age of 40, and you might be looking to reduce overhead in a certain department. It might be bloated from decisions that you've made in the past to promote people, to keep them, give them higher salaries, the market. There could be various factors that have created a top heavy department where you have a lot of folks that maybe are redundant and they're the highest paid, but they're also the most experienced, which also often means how do we get experience? Years of experience accumulate, and so does our age. And the years just keep on going, and all of a sudden we all keep getting older. So a lot of times those things kind of coincide. So you might look and identify, well, making this business decision and it's got merit, and that could all be true. But you look at the trends and you go, oh, wait a second. Now our organization is going to be nothing but people under 40. And that could cause both legal risk and practical risk because of that experience. Looking at the data, realizing these things can be helpful in making those decisions and making sure you're identifying blind spots you might have or thinking through other creative types of solutions.
Yeah. And even if you were to stick to those decisions, you've justified that no, this is a business decision. This is based on tenure, not based on age. At least knowing it in advance gives you the time to prepare yourself. Because someone who, for some reason, has this data and wants to challenge your decisions, they're not going to think through all of that. They're just going to challenge. But if you're prepared and if you have all the backup documentation because you know in advance that you might get challenged, then that's definitely really helpful. This kind of leads me to a point of you have all this data, you're running all the analysis, you're seeing all the numbers, you're seeing all the red flags for certain groups. From my perspective, I can do the numbers all day, but it's really important to get legal involved in-house or someone like you, Sarah, that can guide the statistical analysis and make sure that all of the things being accounted for in these models are defensible and just make sense generally.
That's a great point. You're not alone in this because obviously a lot of what we're talking about sounds a little scary and complicated and challenging. As you can tell, it's all very fact specific, and depending on the company and the situation, there's the groundwork of some things to consider and what you need to be thinking about and the preparedness as far as giving yourself enough time, following a process, those types of things. But it's going to be different for every company, and the risks going to be different because the business decisions you made 2 years ago are probably going to impact what you're doing now. Like in the example I gave, you're not alone. You've got folks to help you, whether it's a lawyer or a consultant or people within your organization, identifying the right group of people to do these types of things. The main takeaway is just to spend the time, because sometimes you can be in a tough situation when you're trying to make these decisions. Most of the time, if you're doing a RIF, it can be for a lot of different reasons, but you don't have the next year to figure that out. They are on truncated timelines typically. And within reason, though, you want to make sure you slow down enough to stop and think about these things and pay attention because you'll save yourself a lot of time on the back end and a lot of headache that you might experience from not exploring these things.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Rue. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.